Alright, now it's time for the comment response on, is BFA lore just super bad? The common consensus was absolutely it was bad. You're an idiot for thinking it wasn't bad, you idiot. And I was like, fair enough. They're not really telling any lies here. So, time to go over some cherry-picked comments about this. I do try to get people who disagree with me, as well as people who do agree or bring up interesting viewpoints. I get a lot of comments, so I kind of just have to pick a couple at random, and then a couple that are saying the same thing. And also, I really love to just pick a couple of comments from one of these response videos, and then do it in a live stream like I did the Q&A. That way I could have a discussion with chat about these kinds of things, and it would really eliminate the cherry-picked nature of it. Because I am lucky enough to have fans who very much do not mind disagreeing with me, and vehemently too. They love to argue with me, and it's great. That actually encourages real conversations. Not real conversations, what's the word for it? More two-sided ones. Instead of just everyone agreeing with each other, there's actually dissenting viewpoints, which is much more interesting. Anyways, first up we have this comment. The only issue I have with WoW lore in general, and BFA in general, is that 3/4 of the lore is found outside of the game itself. It seems to be a blatant cash grab in my opinion. Yeah, so this was a very common sentiment I saw when I was talking about how everything was explained in the books and stuff. A lot of people just kept saying the lore should all be explained in game, and none of it should be in books or anything outside, or things to that degree. Some of them said in much more nicer ways than how I put it. I'm kind of straw manning that kind of opinion right now, and that's just because I don't really agree with this, and that's because I'm a huge story buff myself. I'm a big reader. I read all the time. I'm also a big watcher of TV shows and anime and YouTube videos. I just consume media like crazy, and I read a lot, and I watch a lot, and I finish tons and tons of stories. So as someone who does these kinds of things, I know that, even in video games, you can't really tell the whole story in a video game like WoW. If they're going to expand upon the lore, they need books. Or, sure, they could put the books in game, but those would be gigantic books in game. And it's still better to just put them in books. Real books. Hire people to make those books, because you want good quality books. And good quality books take some time and effort and manpower. And sure, they sell them. And I think if you're going to monetize the game in some way, selling books with extra lore is probably a really good way to do it without pissing off fans. I don't really see too many people complain whenever a new book comes out, in the same way people complain about a new mount being added, because a new book is great. That's an acceptable way to monetize your brand, is expanding upon it in book form. And it's trying to show the book Before the Storm, for example, one of the more recent ones that came out. I don't think it would be possible to show what happened in that book in game. They'd literally just have to have the book in game, and then you could read, a 200-page book in game. And at that point, why don't you just read the book? And then there's also the argument of, can it just be online? They hire, artists and everything. Time and effort goes into these things. I think it's fair for them to try to make a profit off of that, considering how well a lot of these things are written. And again, I have no problems. Oops, my Siri thing went off. What was I even talking about? Oh, I don't care if they charge for the books. If anything, I think that's a great way for them to try to make extra money, is by making more books. Cool stuff. They do also put a lot of free stuff online as well. Good War and Eulogy were both online, so were all the comics leading up to it. You kind of have to read all of it, though, to get a big picture. And yeah, it's not all in-game, and you wouldn't want it all to be in-game. Otherwise, you would just have constant cutscenes all the time, and you'd just be skipping shit. Well, I mean, some people would like that. I think I'd like that too. They do already have a lot of cutscenes as it is, but I've heard Final Fantasy has like 10 times more than WoW does. That seems interesting. Sure, I'm sure they could find a way to get a lot of this extra stuff in there, but there's too much. There's way too much in the books. And it's best left in the books themselves, because the story in the book couldn't be told in game because it requires a lot of first-person perspectives and learning about their inner thoughts, and that really goes more into like film theory and stuff. So, in a book, it's acceptable to talk about a character's inner monologue. You know, that's like a default thing for books, is to hear things from the character's point of view. You're constantly hearing their thoughts and how they react to people, and that stuff is great. But if you show a character's inner monologue in a video game, or in a TV show, or in a movie, that's called lazy writing. Because for some reason, I don't really agree with it, but this is like an industry practice, an industry standard, where you should show and not tell. You should show a character emoting sadness when something sad happens, and you shouldn't have them explain about how bad it is. You know, makes sense. Sure. That also kind of carries over to you're not allowed to show any of their inner thoughts, unless it's just minor things. While in book form, you learn everything through their inner thoughts. And it's great. You get such a better understanding of a character's personality when you're just hearing everything from their point of view and their thoughts and how they react to everyone. And that's something that is almost never shown in TV shows or movies, or in video games where everything's supposed to be told from your perspective. Video games kind of make these things even more complicated because everything has to relate to your character in some way. Or it has to be like the Battle for Dazara lore thing where, you know, someone's just telling you a story. And even then, they make your character take on the position of one of those characters. And if they were going to constantly tell everything in lore, they would constantly have to have you take control of some of those major lore characters to participate in it, which they do occasionally. There was even a whole raid about it. It's just like the system they have now is fine. It could have some improvements though. Like with how many people were confused about Sylvanas. Yeah, that's on them. They should have did a better job conveying it in game. Like someone else made an argument like they don't mind if there's books that explain extra things, but that they should do a better job of explaining big events. Like you shouldn't find out that Carney was killed in a duel in a book. You know, he's alive in one expansion, and you log into the next expansion, and he's dead, and Bane is in charge. Like, yeah, I would kind of agree on that. Same thing with, like, the bombing of Theramore. That happens in a book. There is a scenario in game that explains it, though. So, they need to do more things like that. And they did do a good job with explaining, you know, Sylvanas burning the tree, because the Warbringers makes it very ambiguous about what actually happens. You have to read between the lines, which is a sign of good writing. But also, if you're not very obvious about these kinds of things for like the general public, they're going to miss it. And that's exactly what happened. And they needed to have been even more obvious, because they weren't very obvious with the Warbringer stuff and everything that happens in the books. I mean, not the books. It's very obvious in the books. In the game itself. So, good points on it. They should make major events more, showable in the game. They should show at least the major events. And then Before the Storm, all those kinds of things are fine left in the books. If anything, Before the Storm is just a really good example of how they should use the books. Next one, because I kind of went on a really long, not rant, I just stayed on that question for a really long time. Part of the remaining Highborn join Night Elves during Cataclysm. That's why there's Night Elf mages. Yeah, I don't think I actually mentioned that in the last one. I know about that. That also leaves open a plot hole with Maiev. Or Maiev. I think it's Maiev. Here's the thing. Like, the Night Elves kicked arcane mages out. If you wanted to practice arcane magics, you weren't allowed to be with the Night Elves. That's where the Blood Elves came into existence. But they allowed them back in during the Cataclysm. And then Maiev didn't like that, and she went around and killed them. And she tried to kill Malfurion. And then she escaped. And then they kind of just brushed it under the rug in Legion, and she was a major character helping us. They do acknowledge it, though. It's not like they just completely forgot that happened. They didn't completely forget that Maiev went on a murder spree. They acknowledge it, and then brush it under the rug. They're like, yes. She's like, I've done so many terrible things. Why are you guys here to save me? It's like, because the Legion's more important. And it's like, that's true. Legion is more important. You would think there would be more about it, though. You think more people would be pissed that she was just let in and a major character that helped with major things. But no, not really. They just kind of acknowledged it. Whatever. I thought it was great. I didn't really care too much because that book was boring. Next one. One issue I think people have is not being aware of the majority of the story. Aside from not knowing outside content like previous Warcraft games, lore, books, comments, and so on, a large percentage of the population only sees in-game cutscenes as their source of lore. Yeah, that's sadly true. Most do not read quest story text. One example you mentioned is the bombs on the Horde ships in Dazara cinematics. Lots complained that people had that they relied on the bombs still being there, despite the Alliance questline just before the raid. Shaw went to ensure that they were still there and still operational. Hey, see, I didn't know that. I really need to play through the campaign on the Alliance side. I personally would like it if they included a synopsis of the external stories in the game. They seem to write stories between expansions that have consequences in-game, death of Carney Bloodhoof, but are not shown in-game. I think a text crawl with a voiceover, or maybe some illustrations similar to the ones when you make a new character would be helpful at the beginning of each expansion to get people up to date on the story. That sounds like a good idea. I just think, like, where would they place that at? I'm sure that Blizzard could think of something. My major gripe with the story is making the player be the main driving force of everything since WoD for the most part. The champions with the garrison, the champion that got the Pillars of Creation and relics to stop Sargeras, the owner of the Heart of Azeroth that is saving the planet alone almost single-handedly. That, and I don't like how Uldur was not explained to Alliance main players, like, at all. It was clear the Horde, but just being told to go by Magni seems like it was pretty cheap. Here's the thing with, like, your main character being the driving force of the story. That kind of solves one of the problems I brought up a little bit earlier with how they can't really show events in the book because your character needs to be involved. Making your character, a main driving force in the story allows you to see all the major plot points. Like, it's just kind of a narrative thing. Plus, people like that. They like the fact that their character who's been around and helping since Vanilla WoW is, a badass. He did help kill the Lich King after all, or, kill Deathwing. They are a savior of Azeroth. They should be involved in these kinds of things. I've seen both sides of the arguments on that. Some people reminisce of the vanilla days when they're just a normal adventurer. And other people like the fact they think they've earned their character's place in the world based on everything they've done. And I think both sides kind of have some points to it. I don't really care. I don't idolize the whole lone adventurer thing. And I kind of like the whole Savior Azeroth thing as well, but I'm not super big on it either. Like, I don't really care. Wait, what was I even talking about? My major gripe with this story. There's also some people who don't think their character is important enough, considering everything their character has done. If your character was the one who actually went out and beat everyone, they should be an even bigger player in the story. Alright, next question. It's full of mediocre and unsatisfying writing, which is full of plot holes and plot armor, so may as well just be called bad writing, in my opinion. I get a lot of comments on the videos replying to the title alone without actually watching any of it, which is what I assume this one is, because it's short. Usually those comments are short. Nothing wrong with those kinds of comments. I just like to showcase them occasionally. So here's the thing. I don't think it's full of mediocre writing. I think it's slightly above average. I don't think it's unsatisfying. I think parts of it sure are, but on a whole, not really. It's not full of plot holes. Plot armor, though, I mean, you got me there. There's definitely some plot holes. I mean, Vindicar, like, they have orbital strikes in there. Why are they not using them? Plot armor, yeah, like, absolutely. There's some plot armor. Not even going to argue that. I don't necessarily think plot armor is that bad. Sometimes it's interesting to see how a character gets out of a situation and not whether they'll get out of that situation. There doesn't always need to be life or death situations for every main character. Like, no one thinks Anduin's gonna die, when he goes into the cell with Sourfang. It's interesting because, like, what is he gonna do when he goes into the cell with Sourfang? Next one. I know you're mostly a Horde character, so I'm going to speak as an Alliance character. Most, 65% of the good story things you mentioned are Horde only. Yeah, I didn't even notice that. Like, a lot of people brought this up. A lot of people were saying, like, sure, the Horde story is good, the Alliance story is bad. I was like, you know what, this is probably where most of the complaints are coming from, since I play Horde, and there's all this great stuff going on. I was almost kind of baffled people thought the writing was bad. Besides them just thinking Sylvanas burned the tree for no reason. But I think you might have a point with this. Like, if I only played Alliance, I'm not sure I'd have as strong opinions. For example, Zandalari Forever, the death sequence, the Uldir story, Alliance didn't get a whole lot of that. I actually don't know anything about the Uldir raid until I made 120 Horde Demon Hunter for the Wolf Mount. Yeah, I still need to play through the Alliance story, basically, but all the Horde stuff has been great. I still love the story with the war campaign, actively seek it out now, and I see a lot of Alliance mains knowing nothing because it was never presented to them. I need to really play the Alliance side to see exactly how much of the story you guys get told. Good video, man. I agree. This expansion is unfolding like a book, which I like. Here's the thing with a video game unfolding like a book. With a book, you can finish that at your own leisure. With the video game, sure, it's unfolding, and we're not really getting very much information like with Sylvanas. Like, I'm sure she has a plan. We just don't know anything about it. They've put a lot of hints out there about what it could possibly be, but there's too many of them to really draw any conclusions. So when they do eventually reveal what it is that she's doing, it'll be obvious in hindsight, and that's always a good thing in a book. Like, as you're reading it, you have all of this anticipation being built up, and you're having a good time as you're reading it because you're expecting a nice payoff for all that anticipation. But if you get to the end of the book, and then there is no payoff, you retroactively have a bad time with it. Like, sure, you might have been enjoying all of the setup. It's like, ooh, what is this all leading to? I bet it's great. And then it has a very disappointing ending, and you're like, that, like, retroactively makes everything worse. The same can also be in the complete opposite, where it's like, man, this is annoying. All of this stuff that keeps happening, we have no idea. And then they do a reveal at the end, and you're like, oh, and then retroactively you have a good time. It's funny how that's even a thing that exists. It's like a human-only problem. Like, you could be watching a very close sporting event, and the teams are back and forth, and it's real close. And then if your team loses, you think, damn it, that was terrible, and you're only going to have negative opinions about that event. But if your team won, you think, ooh, that was a good game. It was super close. And it was only good because your team won. You can have your enjoyment of something in the moment retroactively ruined or improved based on the ending of an outcome. And we can't just skip to the end of the book. We have to just wait. The story is being time-gated to an extent. So like a year from now, none of this will really matter because we'll be at the conclusion. But for now, in the middle of the story, it's kind of a problem. Kind of the problem with, a story-like structure in a video game, Whereas it's literally, kind of like how I said a book can't work into video game. This is kind of why. This is one reason anyway. Okay, so this next one, it's a pretty long comment. The convey of character motivations and plans are pivotal for good story writing. The ideas, dreams, and ambitions of the central characters bear heavy on the plot. It doesn't have to give away the ending, but it should inform us why the events in the story actually occur, and the reasons behind it. In Battle for Azeroth, we don't know the motivations of our central antagonist, Sylvanas. What does Sylvanas actually want with this lore? Why, beyond military strategy, does she want to burn Teldrassil? Why does she take the Shadow Priest weapon? What does she want to do with it? What can it do now without Xal'atath? Nothing is really established, like, say, the Lich King or the Burning Legion. While the Legion's raison d'etre was changed through retcons, their overall goal is too easy to comprehend. They want to scour the planet and enslave what is left. The Lich King wants to essentially dominate everything in Undeath. Clear, concise motivations that don't give away the entirety of the plot, nor the entirety of the plan, but we know what they want. What does Sylvanas want? If it's as simple as I want to rule the world and make everything undead, I would be fine with that, but she doesn't say anything of the sort. Saving plot motivations for the end can work as a twist, but in order to do so, you need to give some sort of base motivation prior to such, and point to the character maybe not being fully honest with you. Ignoring everything else, the disconnect with the Alliance leveling, the rehashed plot points from Mist, etc. I would not call this good writing, mediocre to middling in terms of overall story. Individual quests were pretty well written in early leveling, but unless you were Horde, ultimately irrelevant to the story as a whole. Yeah, it seems like Alliance just really got shafted. I guess that's the end of my rant. I don't really have anything much to say to this, because I just kind of talked about this in a different way in the previous comment. I was like, yeah, this is it's just a good comment. I agree with it. Well said. Next one. I say no bad writing, but just conveying. They left out very big story parts for the sake of the books, but this makes some of the actions of characters unfitting. But if you have the books and the game, I think the writing is honestly good. Just not the part about Rastakhan. Yeah, that's what I said in the original one. I think most people think the lore is bad because they just haven't read any of the extra materials. And their big counter-argument to that is usually, well, you shouldn't have to. I just don't agree with that. I don't agree with it, I should say. I did say that in kind of a mocking way, as if I'm talking down to those kinds of people. While I personally don't agree with that, I think that's a pretty fine opinion to have. If you think everything should be told in the game, I don't think that's a very invalid opinion to have. I just think it needs to be a little bit more nuanced than that. Sure, I agree they should tell big story moments in game. I don't think everything, because it just doesn't work. And yeah, my opinions on that, I'm not going to waver on it, but I also really don't want to discredit the opposite opinion too mockingly, as I just did. That's basically what it was. This next one's really long. I cut it into 3 parts. And that's because it's a great comment. I should say, Miss Frozen Grip over here, I did about your comment. I did love it, even though I'm about to disagree with a lot of what you said. I hope you don't mind. Let's get into this. With the Nightborne stuff, it isn't so much that they joined the Blood Elf / Horde, it's the fact that Darissa, throughout the questing, was saying how she would repay the people that would help her and make her mark in the world. And yet that somehow means only helping one side, and indirectly supporting the side which burnt down the World Tree. And the side who helped the Nightborne the most, aka Night Elves and High Elves. And the High Elves. Furthermore, it is high likely that the Night Elves and Nightborne share a lot of families, given how prominent Night Elves come from the cities such as Tyrande, Malfurion, Shadowsong Twins, etc. And yet all of this has been dropped. Even when Darissa was walking through Stormwind City, she doesn't care about the refugees. what she walks past or what she has seen. That doesn't mention that both the Horde and Alliance are scrambling for allies, so it makes little sense that Anduin wouldn't even attempt to pursue a possible alliance with the Nightborne. Also, Tharissa joins the Horde on the spot after a tour of 2 rooms, the Sunwell, a fountain of power, which they got rid of because of what it caused, without any considerations of her actions. I would consider all that bad writing, as you have to ignore or change parts of the story in order for it to make sense. I feel like there was something else. No, that wasn't someone else's comment. Someone else. People don't really like the whole Nightborne situation. Here's the thing, though. Sure, she said she would help repay the person who, helped them out. Like, I did the quest as a Blood Elf, so her joining the Blood Elf makes sense. If you did the quest as a Night Elf, then I guess you would feel betrayed that they ended up joining the Horde instead. They have people who are families with people in the Nightborne, because, what was it? The Night Elves, what was it? How many prominent Night Elves come from the city, such as Tyrande, Malfurion, and Shadowsong. Here's the thing with the Nightborne. They probably have more in common with the Blood Elves, which I mentioned in the original video, and you neglected to mention here. Sure, there's some prominent Night Elves from the city they're from. There's also the whole thing that the Blood Elves were exiled from the Night Elves after the War of the Ancients because they wanted to keep using magic. And the Nightborne broke away because they wanted to keep using magic, with their Moonwell. Crap, I forget what it's called. The Nightwell? I think it's called the Nightwell. Like, the Nightborne are much more similar to the Blood Elves than the Night Elves. The Night Elves themselves, the ones you have in game, are largely consisted of, the common folk who didn't live in the big cities. The druids and stuff. They wanted to kick out all the spellcasters, and all the spellcasters were basically the Highborn. Or, the Nightborne and the Blood Elves. They have much more in common than the Night Elves. So if anything, it makes much more sense for them to join up with the Night Elves. With the Blood Elves than it does the Night Elves. And this whole argument is under the assumption that it makes more sense for them to join up with the Night Elves, and I don't see it. Only because I think this is just the Nightborne and the Night Elves look similar, and they look more similar than they do to the Blood Elves. But culturally, they are much more similar to the Blood Elves. It makes much more sense for them to join up with the Blood Elves. And also, the Night Elves were mean to them, whereas the Blood Elves were nice to them. So they had 2 things on their side. They also most likely had family within the Blood Elves as well. It just makes more sense for them to join the Blood Elves. And it's not really that much of a stretch. There's also the whole point that when the Nightborne did visit the Sunwell, Illyria was also there, and she nearly corrupted it. And the Nightborne definitely saw that, because they were in the middle of a trip when that happened. I don't think that really has too much bearing on why they didn't join the Alliance. It makes sense for them to join the Horde, and I don't understand why that's so hard to believe. And I think it's just because of the whole Nightborne look like Night Elves thing. That's why people just don't want to, accept it. Other than, there are also some legitimate reasons like they brought up. I don't think those reasons are enough because the Blood Elves also have, literally the exact same reasons. Those are just conveniently dropped out from your little writing down. And the rest of this comment is really long. It would take forever to reply to everything. So I'm not going to. As much as I'd really like to, it would, this person brings up so many points that I would love to talk about, but it would make the video half an hour longer. So, let's go on to the next question. Sorry, Hiru, you do your research, and I like your videos, but you couldn't be wronger at times during this video. Lillian Voss, who's she? She's vengeance. All her story, it was all about vengeance. Scarlets, necromancers, legions, those were all her taking vengeance. Her and BFA, she's just unrecognizable. She's just a random undead who does things. Come to think of it, she never was part of the Horde, was she? I have talked about Lillian Voss in at least 3 different videos, if not more. I sometimes get comments on my videos talking about, it's like, ooh, did you add Lillian Voss to this list? Because I mention her so many times, like, I am an expert on Lillian Voss specifically. I started playing Hearthstone again because they added Lillian Voss to the game as a card. Back in the Frozen Throne expansion. When it comes to Lillian Voss, no one knows more about her than I do. And if I say her character definitely fits, I like to think of myself as an authority on this very minor character. So, who is she? Random undead that does things. Random undead that does things within her character. Her character, which was continued past the whole vengeance storyline from the undead starting zone. Vengeance against the Scarlet Crusade and necromancers, and the Legion. Sure, that's one way to describe it. Another one was, she doesn't like necromancers. The Scarlet Crusade, she didn't like them either because they kind of turned on her after she became an undead. And the Legion, of course she's going to fight the Legion. She also joined the Uncrowned Legion, and mentions them in hints in BFA. She never was part of the Horde? No. And that's also explained if you talk to her in BFA. All of this stuff is explained in game. They actually went through great efforts to explain all this stuff because during the beta in BFA, people were asking all these questions like, she's not part of the Horde, what is she doing there? And they basically gave her dialogue options in order to explain these very commonly brought up things about her. So I'd recommend reading those dialogues because they explain everything you just brought up. All right, next question. It's far, far easier to just not know what you're talking about and blindly say it's bad than it is to actually spend the time and form your own opinion. I doubt that will ever change. Yeah, I used to think everyone, looked into things to form their own opinions. And then I thought, I'm not too partial to 50 Shades of Grey. I've heard nothing but bad things about it. But have I actually watched it or read it? No. Do I ever want to? No, but I'm still going to say it's bad. So I kind of understand where they're coming from with these kinds of things. Sometimes, what if I read it and I do enjoy it? I can't possibly think I will. Because I've seen lots of reviews of people basically going over the books, in broad strokes and everything in there. It just makes it seem like it's terrible. But, forming your opinions based on popular opinion, it just kind of saves time. There's so many things in the world that you have opinions on that you don't even know you've formed based on popular opinion. So, it's not all bad, but also, I have a friend who shall remain nameless because this is probably a common thing, who says he doesn't like to form opinions on things until he's heard someone else state their opinion on it, because he doesn't want to have the wrong opinion. And that was just very baffling. And I was like, this is probably something people think. Even if they don't say it out loud like this, this is probably a real thing. Even going past the whole, having opinions don't even know about. But purposefully only having opinions based off of someone else's opinion. That's definitely a thing. Let's go on to the next one. One of my favorite lines from Nathanos is, I need my most competent, strongest, and intelligent fighters on this mission. Unfortunately, they died 3 months ago, so I'm sending you instead. Yeah, see, this is why people loved Nathanos. Loved in the past tense. Before he started to be brought up to the forefront, because people don't like it when they're mean to them. They want all the characters to coddle them and be nice. Or, treat them as the savior of Azeroth. All right. That's it for this. I think I might have cut out some of the questions because they were too long and I spent too long talking back to them. So that's it for this. Good discussion. Hopefully I can do one of these as a live stream someday. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't even know how that would work. This seems like something that only works in a video in this style.